So a shiver ran down my spine, the kind that would make my granny say, "Oh my goodness, someone's just walked over your grave." However, it was more likely to be the cold of the crisp April morning or the adrenaline coursing through my veins, as it had been constantly for the past 24 hours. As I sat looking out at the Liverpool docks in my trusty Citroen C1, which was filled to the brim of my remaining worldly goods, including a multitude of cuddly toys I was far too old to own, I thought about my journey ahead to sunny Northern Ireland, which involved an hour's drive from Manchester to get here, a 2-hour wait here at Liverpool docks, an 8-hour boat journey to Belfast, followed by a 45-minute drive to my parents' house at the other end, which at the time seemed like a really daunting prospect. But before I had a chance to dwell on that thought, I was jolted upright by someone knocking on my driver's side window, signaling that it was my turn to drive onto the ferry up ahead. As I started up the engine, and with it the heating thankfully, I was reminded of the reverse journey to this one, 14 years previously. The same feelings of anticipation, excitement, and anxiety were there in that journey too. For as long as I can remember, and as long as university was an option, I knew I didn't want to go to one in Northern Ireland. I remember all 6 of my preferred options being universities in England or Scotland on my ACAS form. Well, that wasn't until my mother started with the good old Catholic guilt. Do you really want to be away from your family that badly? What if you change your mind? Maybe you could just put one of your choices as Queen's or Jordanstown. Look, Jordanstown does a similar course to the one you want to do. So I put the Jordanstown course down as an option, knowing full well I never intended to go there. And sure enough, as my grades came through, the decision to go to Manchester was set in stone. I remember the excitement of the envelope coming through the post with the university logo on it and squealing as I read the words, "Dear Cathy, we're pleased to inform you." This all led to my parents and I squeezed into their car with pots, pans, clothes, shoes, cuddly toys, a hi-fi. For those of you old enough to remember what they are. For those of you who don't, it's what we older millennials used to play our music on. And whatever else we could squeeze into the car to set me up for my new life in Manchester. I was 19 years old and never been away from home without my parents for longer than a week. And that was for my first girls' holiday, which resulted in 3rd-degree burns on my stomach from sunburn and a trip to A&E upon my return. So my feelings of apprehension and the knots in my now newly healed stomach were well-founded. The decision was made to book the boat from Belfast to Stranraer, and then my dad would take the lead on the 4-hour journey to my halls of residence from there. And for those of you who are regulars at 10x9 will know how comfortable my dad is driving outside of Northern Ireland. However, mainland Britain is slightly easier to drive through than France in the 90s with no sat-nav. The journey from Stranraer was actually pretty straightforward, and despite the odd disagreement on whether my mum had given Dad adequate notice to take the 2nd or 3rd exit over whatever roundabout we were on, we managed to arrive at my halls unscathed. I had planned my arrival outfit for weeks. I had on a pair of black jeans, a black polo neck with the white Chinese symbols on the chest. Do you remember those? It was very early 2000s-esque. My hair was tied up in a tight ponytail. I was trying to put across that I was trendy, hip, friendly. And then it was years later, my now friends that I met on that day informed me that I looked incredibly studious and quiet. Shows how self-aware my 19-year-old self was. And for those of you wondering, it took all of 4 days for them to change that initial first impression of me, but that's an entirely different 10x9 story. My parents waved goodbye a few days later, having settled me into my new home, which consisted of a tiny room, rectangular in shape, that had a single bed, a wash basin, a chair, and a wardrobe. And if I sat on the edge of my bed, I could reach out and touch the opposite wall. As I looked around the room that I was going to be spending the next 9 months in, I never would have thought that I would still be in Manchester 14 years later. My thoughts were interrupted by a phone loudly going off. "Hello, Brian speaking." I wonder if Brian knew just how loud and annoying his ringtone was. Also, we were in the middle of the Irish Sea. How was he managing to get signal? I looked at my watch. Another 4 hours until we arrive in Belfast. I look out over the Irish Sea, Seems quite smooth today, with just a hint of mist up ahead blocking the view. Seems appropriate, I think, since my view of what's coming up is also quite hazy. What on earth led me to moving home again, I think? I'd always sworn I would never move back to Northern Ireland. Why would I want to? I had friends in Manchester, a career, a life. I know everyone had hoped I would move back home 4 years prior to this, when I gave the ring back to the man I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. That day in February 2014 was not one I wanted to remember. I remember as I turned away from him and climbed into the transit van I had hired the day before, filled with my belongings Dad had helped me take from the house earlier that day. I looked at Dad, who was at the wheel, and just asked him to drive on. As the tears rolled down my cheeks, Dad turned to me and said, "Cathy, I really want to comfort you right now, but I have no idea where I'm going. So I need you to pull yourself together and tell me where to go." So with that, I laughed and told him to take the right at the head of the road. United were playing that night, so we had a small window of time to get across Manchester before the roads came to complete standstill. As we pulled up to my new house, one I'd secretly signed a lease on a few weeks before, we realised I didn't actually have any furniture yet. I had a bed delivered the week before, but I had no mattress. And as we looked around the furniture my landlady had left for me, we went about making makeshift beds out of a rocking chair, some duvets, pillows, and of course my cuddly toys, which I was actually glad to have a justifiable reason to own at the grand old age of 29. Over the tannoy I heard, "We'll be shortly arriving in Belfast. The weather today is clear with a gentle breeze." So this was it. I was finally back in Northern Ireland, and for good this time. Not a weekend visit, or a wedding, or a funeral, as it had been in the past. Well, there's no going back now, I thought as I climbed into my trusty Citroen C1 again. And as I pulled out of the Belfast docks and put my parents' address into Google Maps on my phone, I thought about how farcical that was, that over the years I'd made fun of Dad driving around Ireland, Britain, France, or wherever with only a paper road map and my mum to guide him, and I couldn't even make it out of Belfast to where I grew up without a sat-nav guiding me. So as I laughed at myself, the anxiety of the situation left my body, and I hoped that maybe, just maybe, this would be the last time I would start over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cathy. Brilliant. I can see your folks both watching. God knows that your poor mother has had to put up with a lot over the years.
She has.
So you can actually verify that your father is not the greatest driver that ever drove.
No, he tries though. He tries really hard.
Well, as long as we get stories out of it, sure, what does it matter? Padraig wants to know, Cathy, do you have a cuddly toy near you at the minute?
I do. I have Tigger.
Oh. Oh, very good, very good. Oh, Cathy, thanks so much. So delighted.
Yeah, thank you both.
What a great start. Thank you. I hope we'll have you back.